Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate it. As Glenn said, my name's Mark, here today to talk about everything to do with education bonds and the different strategies we can implement to assist your clients. First and foremost, Adam Crabb, still in the room? Absolutely professional. IT goes down, presentation continues on. Just a heads up, if the IT goes down, I go out the door. So I don't have the same level of professionalism that Adam had during that. But saying that, we do have a slide deck to go through, which hopefully is here. The idea of today is to run through the mechanics of education bonds, how they work, how they operate, the ins and outs of them. They can be technical at times, so it'll be a good overview today. But more importantly, I want to run through a couple of real life case studies or client scenarios where we look at clients that have actually walked into an advisor's office, what was identified by that advisor, why they recommended an education bond, and the outcome for a client. So our overarching goal is for you, when you get back to your office, to go through your client book, have a look at your client base and say, okay, which clients do I think an education bond could benefit and why? So do ask one thing, feel free to get a pen, paper, your iPad, whatever you use, take some notes. If you think of a client, when I'm going through the presentation that could suit, jot it down. I'll be here at lunch, I'll be here for a drink afterwards. Come and have a chat and we'll talk about the scenario. So if it works, we can tee up something more formal later. So before we get started, just a quick show of hands. Say in the last 12 months, who in the room has used an investment bond or education bond strategy for one of their clients? Excellent. That number's getting bigger and bigger every time we ask, which is fantastic. Keep the hand up if that was actually an education bond rather than an old school traditional investment bond. Fantastic. That is really good to see. Standard disclaimer, I think. There we go. You guys provide personal financial advice. We provide general advice. Anything I talk today about is general in nature. So I've been with Futurity now for just under 2 years. I've spent 20 years in financial services as an advisor, as an advisor, managing advice teams and working for a large licensee. So been in business development now for 2 years, all with Futurity. When I started with Futurity, I did the obligatory LinkedIn update. Said, I'm really happy I'm now starting with Futurity. I had a lot of phone calls from my advisor mates calling me going, congratulations on the new role. Who is Futurity? So there was a bit of a learning curve for them. What I'm very happy with now is that conversation is not who is Futurity. The conversation is why have we only started hearing about Futurity in the last 6 to 12 to 18 months. So a bit of background on Futurity. Futurity was established in 1974. We've got close to $1 billion under management, and being an investment bond education bond provider, we're governed by both APRA and ASIC. Okay, so it raises the question, been around for 50 years, you've got $1 billion under management, which is extremely well capitalised, and you're in a highly regulated environment. Why has it only been in the last 18 months that you've been hearing about us? This goes back to our previous years. Before we were known as Futurity, we were known as another company called the Australian Scholarship Group, or ASG. Hands up, ASG, anyone heard of them? Yeah. A lot of clients, a lot of advisors. So in 1974, ASG, it's a pure scholarship plan. It was a cutting edge product for parents to save for their children's tertiary education. It wasn't sold by advisors, it was sold door to door, sold through schools, sold through a lot of direct channels, not through advisors. So 50 years ago, cutting edge. Times do change though. And in 2018, our board got together and they decided to review the product to see if it was still fit for purpose. We went to market to try and find someone to run that review, and we're lucky enough to come across a guy by the name of Ross Higgins. So Ross Higgins is the preeminent expert in investment bonds in Australia. He started a company called Austock, which turned into Generation Life, and he was the CEO of Austock and Generation Life for 16 years before Grant Hackett took over. He's absolutely the expert. So he retired from Generation Life for 6 months, came across and reviewed our product. He realised it was no longer fit for purpose, whilst it was a cutting edge product, no longer fit for purpose, and we could do a little bit better from a product point of view. So in 2020, we launched Futurity Education Bonds as we know it today. So we are a Melbourne-based company, 2020, height of lockdown, was a bit of a soft launch for us. However, where are we today? We are now Australia's #1 education bond provider, okay, from a product innovation point of view and also from a flows point of view. There are only 3 providers, but we are #1, which is still pretty good. So education. So let's talk about education and why it's important. Our studies show that if you want to send in Sydney a child to a private school from kindergarten through to year 12, it's going to cost you significantly north of $350,000 to do so. You add on an undergraduate degree and a postgraduate degree, and the prices skyrocket. It's a significant expense that many families many families will face. Unfortunately, they fail to plan for, which is understandable. We've got cost of living pressures, we've got interest rates being at astronomical, well, I won't say astronomical highs, we've got interest rates being higher than they have been in the recent past. So it is understandable that parents aren't planning on education. However, there is one family group that do notice the importance of education and the importance to plan for it and fund it, and that's grandparents. So if you guys, I'm sure you are, but if you're not talking to your grandparents about their grandkids, I suggest you do so. You'll be amazed at their reaction. So as I mentioned earlier, the scary thing is people do not plan for this expense. We've also got some other research that shows that the amount of education expense that is funded by private sources every year is $40 billion. Okay, that's coming out of personal pockets. We've also done some research in a couple of private schools in Sydney, which shows that more than 50% of school fees are being funded by someone who is not the child's parents. Okay, so that can be a range of different people. That can be grandparents, which it generally is. It can be family trusts, it can be companies, it can be a range of different sources that are funding these expenses. But over 50% of the time, it's not actually the parents that are doing so. So I've spoken about education and why it's important. But one of the misconceptions about education bonds is that they can only be used for education purposes. And that was the fact many, many years ago. In 2001, they changed the legislation to actually create more flexibility in the education bond space. So much so that whilst we are called an education bond, I think a more appropriate name for our bonds could be a family bond or a discretionary bond. And that will explain what we do a little bit better than an education bond. So, education bonds and investment bonds. This is one of our key slides. Glenn said that he's seen the presentation 6 or 7 times. You would have seen this slide 6 or 7 times. We talk to this a lot. This will highlight the differences between investment bonds and education bonds. At the heart of every education bond is an investment bond. Okay? And an education bond will always be an investment bond, but an investment bond can't be an education bond. And the reason being is that education bonds are hard-coded into the Tax Act under a scholarship plan. So we have additional features and benefits that we add to an education bond that an investment bond cannot do. Okay, so I'm going to talk through some of the similarities and some of the differences between education bonds and investment bonds. I'll start with the similarities, starting on the left-hand side, your right-hand side, sorry. So number 1, tax-paid investing. As you know, investment bonds are internally taxed at a rate of 30%, spot on, generally lower depending on the investment option if you take into account franking credits, foreign tax offsets, all those kind of things. So investment bonds, education bonds, all operate under the same tax structure. Avenue for tax-free access, 10-year rule applies to investment bonds and to education bonds. So obviously you can access the complete bond tax-free after 10 years or tax paid after 10 years. Asset protection from creditors, big one being used by a number of our advisors. If you set up a bond, education or investment, prior to any financial difficulties, the money that's in the bond will be protected from any creditors, which is very big for some of our self-employed clients that we deal with. Future activated transfers, fantastic feature that allows a bond to be transferred to a new bond owner at a set point in time with no tax implications. We can invest as a savings plan or a lump sum plan in bonds, which is fair enough. 125% rule does apply to education bonds as it does apply to investment bonds. However, the implications of breaking that 125% rule are not as significant in an education bond as it is in an investment bond, which I will touch on. And will like estate planning features. Okay, bonds are non-estate asset, which is brilliant. They can be challenged as part of an estate, however, no challenge has ever been successful because they are a non-estate asset. So lots of our advisors who are looking at that intergenerational wealth transfer and estate planning features of bonds are liking our products because of this. So they're the similarities between an investment bond and an education bond. How is an education bond different? Okay, and these are the dark blue circles down the bottom. The first two from the right-hand side coming across are quite structural in nature. So number one is a bond guardian feature, and the second one is the ability to have multiple or discretionary education beneficiaries. And I'll show you what that looks like. So this is a standard structure for an education bond. I'm going to walk around a little bit, sorry, probably make you all a bit dizzy, but education bond is blue in the middle there. We have got the ability to add multiple education beneficiaries to each bond. In a standard bond, you'll have one bond, one beneficiary. If you want to add another beneficiary, you're going to set up another bond with another beneficiary and so forth. So let's use the example of a grandparent coming in, existing client of yours. They come in for their annual review and say, we're so happy, we're about to have our first grandchild. You say, fantastic, that's brilliant. You ask them a few more questions. They decide they want to use some of the capital that they've accrued over a period of time to invest for this new grandchild. Think, fantastic, let's use a bond, right? Best structure for it. You set one up in the new SOA, you go through all that process. They come in at your next review and they say, guess what? We're going to be grandparents again. And you say, that's fantastic, I've got to do a new SOA to do a new bond for your new grandchild. And if they have 6 or 7 grandchildren, you've got 6 or 7 different bonds established for those grandchildren. What our product allows is that it gives you the ability to add beneficiaries onto the existing bond. Okay, so they've come in and said, guess what, we're having another grandchild. You say, that's fantastic, you have a conversation with them, and you realise the best thing is to make another contribution into that existing bond and just add another beneficiary to the bond. We can have up to 10 beneficiaries on the one bond, and the beauty is you can remove them at any time as well. So if one of those grandkids is a bit of a pest, they can tell listen, I don't like that grandchild anymore, they can actually remove them as a beneficiary of that bond. So it provides a bit of flexibility from that and a bit of ease of portfolio management for certain clients. It's not for everyone. The one downside, I guess, or the one consideration you need to take into account is that the money that's in that education bond is actually pooled and not each grandchild. Each grandchild doesn't have their own allocation to the funds. Okay, if you want their own allocations, you just set up individual bonds, that's fine. Okay, so it's a good feature. The next feature is the bond guardian, which we can provide. And we see this being taken all the time, and I'll run through a case study later on if I have the time to talk about how it works in practice. The bond guardian is someone that will take control of the bond once the bond owner passes away or becomes incapacitated and can't make financial decisions. What happens with a normal bond is that the bond owner passes away, the bond will transfer into the estate, and the trustee of the estate or the executor of the estate will actually manage that bond on behalf of the education beneficiaries. This allows a little bit further separation away from the estate to provide control past the grave for those clients. That bond guardian can be anyone, and we can have up to 3 bond guardians on any one bond with all to sign or one to sign. So it gives a little bit of control through there as well. If you have any questions as we're going, please ask them. I'm happy for this to be conversational in nature, or just put them through the app. One of the features that we do have with the bond guardian, which we do see, is that the bond owner can give any form of control to that bond guardian that they like. So a white picket family, you might have a white picket fence family, you might have the bond owner as the grandparents, you've got the grandchildren as the beneficiaries, bond owners pass away, and their children, the parents of the beneficiaries, will take control of the bond, and the bond owners, the grandparents, will say you can do whatever you like with the bond. You can add money, you can withdraw money, you can close it, you can do whatever you like. Or there might be a few more intricacies, and the bond owner might say, you know what, we don't want you to do anything with the bond, we just want you to be able to receive statements from it, but it's going to get locked down until the grandchildren inherit this bond via a future activated transfer at a set point in time. Okay, so the bond guardian feature, great estate planning tool. And I'll try and go back. All right, there's two other features, and I think these are the big ones. As I said, I was an advisor for 20 years. I worked with a few advisors in this room over that period of time. I thought I knew a fair bit about advice. Turns out I didn't know these features of an education bond. The first one is the ability to add capital or withdraw capital at any point in time. With an education bond hardwired into the Tax Act, as I said, as a scholarship plan, that scholarship plan says from day one, the education bond has to keep your capital and your earnings separate. Okay, so you've got a client that puts in $100,000 into a bond, that goes into a capital account. Any earnings go into an earnings account. That earnings account will fluctuate, move up and down daily based on our daily unit pricing. The beauty of that is, and the flexibility that it provides, is that client can access their capital account at any time, for any purpose, completely tax-free. It's purely a return of capital. Okay, so we might see a client, grandparent once again, says, you know what, I've had a couple of grandchildren, I'm going to put $100,000 into a bond. They put $100,000 into a bond. A few years later, they think, you know what, we want to access some of this money to go on a holiday, or we need to access some of it for medical emergencies, whatever it may be. Let's use the holiday one, that's always nicer. We want to access some of that $100,000 to go on a holiday. They just write to us, they withdraw money from that capital account, all or part of, return the capital to them, they can spend that money as they see fit. Okay, so a much more flexible operation than a traditional investment bond, where it is all mixed together, and if you're making any withdrawals, which you can do in the first 10 years, you're going to create a tax event by taking out some of the earnings. Any questions on that? Any thoughts? That is a very good feature. No? Excellent. The next one is why it's called an education bond and where the education piece comes into it. So you've got your earnings component, you've got your capital and your earnings. If you want to withdraw some of your earnings to fund education purposes, you'll get a 30% tax uplift on that withdrawal for education purposes. It's called an education benefit claim. Okay, so a common scenario is you'll get a client, walk in, I'll use my scenario, I've got a daughter that's in high school. If she needs a new laptop, I can do a withdrawal form through Futurity, through the bond that I have, and say, okay, I'd like to withdraw $1,000 from the earnings component, and it is for education. Futurity will pay me that $1,000 for that laptop. Okay, the balance in my education bond only drops by $700. Okay, because there has been a 30% education tax benefit put back in by the ATO. It's effectively the tax that's been paid inside the bond gets refunded into the bond because it's been used for education purposes. All right. So that's where the education piece comes into it. There is a bit of a tax issue with it, which I'll run through in a moment, because the tax office obviously gives you nothing for free, but there's ways that we can work through it. All right, so who uses an education bond? I think that I could go through an advisor's client base, and I think I could find a reason for every single one of your clients to use an education bond. That's not going to happen. You don't want me to go through your client base. We don't want to spend the time to do it. But the uses for education bonds are very, very broad. So who do we see using them? Clients who traditionally have used investment bonds are a big one. So clients on the top marginal tax rate who are looking for a tax-effective investment. We also get parents who are looking to invest on behalf of their children who may use some of the funds for education purposes in the future. We've got grandparents who have accumulated some wealth and they want to help their children and their grandchildren or even their great-grandchildren, and they're unsure of the best way to do it. And the other three that we see very regularly is when we're dealing with inheritances or payouts from a superannuation fund or a life insurance policy or money from a testamentary trust. Right, so we talked about how money can go into, or who puts money into an education bond. Now let's talk about how we get money out of an education bond. There's three ways that we can do a withdrawal. Okay, as I said, in a normal investment bond, there's only one way. With us, we've got three separate ways. So starting at the bottom, number one, we can make a withdrawal under investment bond rules. Okay, we all know how that operates. If you make a withdrawal in the first 10 years, there is going to be some tax implications as you're accessing some of the earnings. We always say, as it says up there, why would you do it under the investment bond rules when we've got other avenues to do so? Okay, so if you're wanting to withdraw some money for any purpose at all, maybe not education, but any purpose at all, you would access your capital account, especially if it's in the first 10 years. Okay, you access the money that's in your capital. If you're going to make a withdrawal for education purposes, then you'll be accessing money that's in the earnings component, which is what we call an education benefit claim. Okay, the benefit of that is you get that 30% tax uplift, which is very favourable. However, as I mentioned before, the sting in the tail is that withdrawal is accessible in the hands of the education beneficiary. Is there any concerns when that money is accessible in the hands of an education beneficiary? Spot on. Because if they're under 18, they've got a tax-free threshold of $416 and they've got penalty tax of anything above that. So it does create a bit of an issue, but there is a way, obviously, that we can work around the withdrawal structure to give you the added benefits for it. So let's just look at a really basic... Sorry, I'm not really comfortable with the... where are we? There we go. With the animations on the slide deck. So let's say you've got a child or a grandchild that's going to a Catholic school. They've got an education expense, as you can see on the right-hand side, of $12,000 a year. And the parents want to use some of their education bond, and the grandparents want to use some of their education bond to make that withdrawal. As you can see, there's two components in that education bond in the middle there. There's the earnings component and there's the capital component. For this client, they've said, okay, let's pull $10,000 out of the earnings component, and we're going to pull $2,000 out of the capital component. That $2,000 put out of capital is purely a return of capital, no tax implications at all. The $10,000 that's coming out of the earnings component, it's for education expenses, so there's a 30% gross up. So your balance in that earnings component only drops by $7,000, not the $10,000, which is brilliant to give you the $12,000. But as you said before, that $10,000 that they withdrew from the earnings component becomes assessable income in the hands of the beneficiary. They've got a tax-free threshold of $416 and a penalty rate of about 66% on money above that. So that's created a bit of a tax event for the minor, which we don't want to do. So what we'll generally do in these scenarios is we'll pull a smaller amount out of the earnings component of $416 up to that tax-free threshold, and the majority of it out of the capital component. There is a slight benefit. You've withdrawn $416 from earnings, you get a 30% uplift, so your balance is only dropping by $291. So there's a slight benefit every year. I've got 3 kids. One goes to a private school, 2 soon will go to a private school. If I start doing that every single year for my 3 kids, we're getting a $126, $125 benefit every year for each child. It does start to add up over a period of time. Okay, there's no doubt about it. However, it's a fair bit of work for that small benefit each year. So how do we see this supercharged? Where we see clients and advisors get the best benefit from this is when we can get the minor, the adult tax-free threshold. Okay, show of hands, quickly yell out, what scenarios can a minor get the adult tax-free threshold? Sorry? Being employed, yeah, that's only from employment income, unfortunately. If they're employed, any unearned income still gets the $416.
If it comes from their own earnings on their own investment.
What? I think it's still the minor tax-free threshold on that. I can confirm. Testamentary trust is one of the big ones, correct. So if they're a beneficiary of a testamentary trust, they'll automatically get the adult tax-free threshold. There's also a few other ways that they can get it. That's the big one, absolutely, and it is up there. Other ways that we can get the adult tax-free threshold is if they are a beneficiary of a child maintenance trust, beneficiary of a special disability trust, beneficiary of a testamentary trust. We see the testamentary trust more than we see the other ones. These ones listed here are the big ones, okay, under the second point. And this basically says any money that's received via inheritance where the child has been nominated in the will, or the minor has been nominated in the will, that money can be invested on behalf of that minor, doesn't have to be in a testamentary trust, and that minor will get the adult tax-free threshold. Okay? If the minor is a listed beneficiary on a superannuation policy or a life insurance policy, that minor will get the adult tax-free threshold. Okay? So these are the ones we are starting to see come through more and more, where there's larger inheritances coming through, and people are, and children are, you've got grandparents that may receive an inheritance, they're looking to invest it on behalf of a grandchild, they may be eligible for the adult tax-free threshold. Then all of a sudden, we can go back to that previous slide, we can start funding education expenses out of the earnings component up to the adult tax-free threshold of $18,200 and start getting a larger education benefit claim for each withdrawal. Okay, so this is where the inheritance piece is very, very important for our product. So if you have any clients that walk in and say, listen, they might be clients, they might be children of your clients, whoever they are, and say, listen, we're about to receive an inheritance. We're not too sure what to do with it. Many people are paying off mortgages, which is a great idea from general advice point of view, but they may have surplus funds. Think of education bonds and could that potentially work for them. Another way to get the adult tax-free threshold is go back to the original scenario, you've got your bond owner, which is the grandparents, you've got the education beneficiaries, which is the grandchildren. If that bond owner was to pass away, the children will automatically benefit from accepted income or the adult tax-free threshold. So if you've got some elderly clients that are wondering how to transfer wealth effectively, potentially they can look at opening up an education bond. They can use that money at any time, but once they do pass away, the children will benefit from the adult tax-free threshold. All right, just changing tact a little bit. Intergenerational wealth transfer. This has to be the buzzword, right? Every conference, everything you go to, there's a million podcasts on intergenerational wealth transfer. I was lucky enough to go to a conference a few months ago, which was a great conference. We had Mr. Andrew Inwood presented, and he spoke about this concept of speaking to your clients, or speaking to people's children about other people's money, okay, which is very, very important. He showed some study that if you do not have a conversation with your clients' children, when your clients do pass away, you'll probably lose about 90% of that fund that you've got sitting on your book. However, if you start to have a conversation with their children, the chances are you'll retain approximately 60% of that fund that you have on your book, which is pretty significant. And I think that 90%, I've spoken to a range of different advisors. I've got advisors that think that is a lot closer to 100% once people pass away, that they are losing that family as clients.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
A strategy we use is with clients that are on 4% income stream, need it, and then they'll feed the bond for their grandchildren.
Yep.
What's the difference between using traditionals versus you guys for the client tax treatments, everything like that? The money's already been taxed, the money's going to come into your product versus the normal education bond. Is there any?
A normal investment bond, you mean?
Yeah.
So Darren basically said, and correct me if I paraphrase this incorrectly, you've got clients who've built up surplus income, grandparents have built up surplus income, and what's the difference between investing in an education bond rather than an investment bond? Mate, don't use investment bonds. No, number one is the flexibility. As I said, the ability for that client to access that capital for any purpose, even within the first 10 years. Okay, so they might say, okay, I like investment bonds, but I don't want to lock it away for 10 years. Okay, so education bond, they can access that capital at any time.
Sometimes can't recontribute it back to super, so they're looking for...
So yeah, for another tax-effective way to invest, absolutely that's one. And the other one is if they've got the thought that maybe, potentially, we will use some of this money to fund the education costs for our grandchildren, they're going to start getting that tax uplift as well. Right, I'm going to fly through these because I do want to get to it. I've got 15 minutes. I want to get to a couple of real life scenarios. But this wealth transfer possibility, lots of advisors are now starting to use our product to facilitate that discussion with their clients about future generations. Okay, and this study that shows that, you know, as it stands, less than 1/3 of the population are baby boomers. However, they hold 2/3 of the country's wealth. Okay, and it's going to be a tsunami of wealth transfer comes through, and you see different numbers bandied about. Andrew Winwood said it's $4.9 trillion, which is higher than normal, but he's taken into account, you know, looking at, you know, vintage cars, wine, art, the whole asset level, rather than just money held in financial institutions. So it's a large amount. So what are some of the hurdles to intergenerational wealth transfer? This. More than 50% of wills are challenged via the estate. The downside of that, obviously, is that any challenge on an estate, who bears the cost of it? The estate bears the cost of it. And what we have found, the larger the estate, the more likely it is for the judge to find in favour of the person challenging it and to give some money to that person challenging it. Okay. We also find that only 45% of Australians have a will, which is crazy, which blew my mind. Okay, and there's a number of different reasons why people don't have wills. I'm based on the Central Coast. I was talking to an advisor there recently who's got a client based in Melbourne who is wealthy. You know, millions and millions of dollars worth of assets, of liquid assets and of property. He does not have a will. He's got 2 daughters. The client does not have a will. The reason he doesn't have a will, he thinks by the time when he creates a will, he'll be signing his own death warrant, which is an interesting concept, but that's his belief, which is fine. So that's why he doesn't have a will. What this advisor has gone to do is to pitch some bond strategies to him to say, okay, you don't want to have a will, but we've got an investment available to you that will provide you certainty upon your death. Apparently that's not signing your own death warrant because it's not a will. I'm not too sure, but that's the strategy that's gone through as well. So it's important that we are talking about these kind of estate planning strategies. So how do bonds help with intergenerational wealth transfer? Number one, as I said, they're a non-estate asset, which is very, very important. We've got binding estate nominees, similar to a binding death nomination in super, however slightly different because we're not bound by this legislation. So we can have any legal entity as a nominee for an investment bond or an education bond. And with us, as I mentioned, that unique guardian facility that we do have in order to provide some control past the grave. Right, I'm up to case studies. We've got 2 beautiful case studies that have been done by our marketing team. This has been recorded. I'm going to skip those and I'm going to talk to you about a few that have been used by advisors that I directly work with in New South Wales. So let me just get back to the features. Okay, first one, advisor up in Chatswood. Very good advisor, deals in the high net wealth clientele. He's got an advisor who's a property developer, okay? Pretty wealthy, okay? He's on the top marginal tax rate, his wife's on top marginal tax rate, he's got family trusts, he's got bucket companies, he's got the whole thing structured, okay? But they're looking for a tax, he doesn't like paying tax, believe it or not. They're looking for a tax-effective investment. So the advisor, being a great advisor, said, right, investment bond or education bond, let's explore those. And why did he think to explore investment bonds? Number one, tax-paid investing, getting taxed at a tax rate of 30% maximum, generally lower, 30% maximum compared to the 47% that the client's on. Right, that ticks the box for minimising his tax. Asset protection from creditors. You thought, how good's this? I'm a property developer, very, very successful. However, if my next project turns south, I could get in a bit of trouble. If I put some money into a bond, I know that's going to be protected and can't be accessed by any potential creditors that I have. Sweet, ticks that box. Okay, so he said, right, investment bonds, education bonds, still no difference in those because they both offer those features. Then that client has got two small boys. They're enrolled at a very expensive school here in Sydney, one of the big GPS schools, and he wants to use, well, the advisor spoke to him and the client agreed to potentially use some of these earnings for education purposes. Right, so education costs, he gets that 30% tax uplift, only a small amount each year, but it does add up over a period of time. But the thing that really swayed the advisor and the clients using an education bond over an investment bond was this access to capital at any time for any purpose. Okay, so this advisor has now invested $1 million for this client into an education bond. The purpose is to use some of the earnings for education purposes when his boys finally get into the school that they're enrolled at. Okay, but he knows that he can access part or all of that $1 million that he put in at any point in time for any purpose. So he knows that if the next project he undertakes, he needs to inject a little bit more capital, he can withdraw that $1 million completely tax-free to do so. Okay, so that's why an education bond has been recommended in that scenario. One more client scenario. This one is an advisor up in Singleton. He's been up in Singleton. Everyone knows Singleton in the Hunter Valley. He's been up there his whole life. He's got an extensive client base. He knows his clients very, very well. He's got two clients, two grandparents, relatively wealthy. Got a couple of properties. They've got some money in super. They've got a bit of money floating around. They've got one son. Okay, and that one son has got two children. Okay, using their terminology, they think that their son is an oxygen thief. Okay, typical like good Singleton kind of clients. They're concerned that when they pass away, the son, the oxygen thief, is going to blow the money that he's left, and their grandchildren who they adore are not going to be left with what they should be left. So they did the right thing. They went and saw a solicitor. Well, they thought they were doing the right thing. They went and saw a solicitor. The solicitor drew it up in the will that each grandchild was going to receive $350,000 on their passing. Happy days. They then received further advice, not from the advisor, but from someone else, that said that will, your estate, can be challenged by the oxygen thief, by your son, and he's probably going to be, well, he could potentially be successful because he's the guardian of the children. So if he puts a good enough case together, he's going to get his hands on the money and he could blow it, right? They could have gone down the route of a testamentary trust, which would have worked fantastic. Wasn't many solicitors in Singleton that wanted to set up a testamentary trust for $700,000. So they thought, what are the options? Came and saw the advisor. The advisor said, have I got a deal for you? No, he said, what we're going to do, we're going to look at an education bond for you. It's a non-estate asset. Okay, we're going to set up two individual investment bonds, one for each grandchild, $350,000 in each bond. That money's going to be invested as you see fit, in line with your risk profile. Any earnings or any capital, you can access the capital anytime for any purpose. So if you want to buy the kids something, you want to buy them a new car if you're still around when they start driving, you can do that, access the capital, pay that. Whatever you like, you can use that capital for. If you want to use some of the earnings for education costs while you're still around, you can do that as well. And they're already paying some of their education costs. So just at the local public school, but they were buying laptops, they were buying school books, they were buying everything because of the oxygen thief. So education bonds worked exceptionally well. They set up two education bonds, they reset their will to how it was. They now know that their grandchildren are going to inherit $350,000 each at a set point in time. They've gone down the route of making their son, the oxygen thief, the bond guardian. Okay, which is a bit strange, but they've limited the power that bond guardian can have. They want full transparency with their son. So their son knows it's been established, but he's only going to have power to receive annual statements, okay? And that's only when the bond owners both pass away. When those both bond owners pass away, we've limited the instructions that bond guardian can do. He can't make any withdrawals, he can't fund anything. He's going to hold it in place until the future activated transfer takes effect, which has already been input, which is at the age of 28, and the client chose 28, I'm not too sure why. At the age of 28, the children will inherit the balance of this bond completely tax-free. They'll become the new bond owner, okay? And this has effectively made that client's wealth skip a generation and go to who they want, when they want. So it's given them that little bit of extra control, and it's given them absolute peace of mind for when they do pass away. So that's two examples. I've got loads that I can run through. So come have a beer with me, and you won't be able to shut me up afterwards talking about all the people that are using our education bonds. So I've got 5 minutes to go. People ask, what is the sweet spot for our education bonds? And let me get to it. So I don't know why I'm pointing this at the screen, but that's what I'm doing. So the sweet spot for our education bonds. So people who want longevity, a long investment time frame, but also want accessibility to capital if required. People who need protection from creditors or from family conflicts, or when there are education or other life events for grandchildren or intergenerational wealth transfers. So that's kind of the three broad areas that we really do assist with. We're not, if you've got mums and dads that come in, want to set up a regular savings plan because they want to put $200 a month in for their children to attend a private school, fantastic, this is also the best structure. However, there is so much more to offer than just the traditional thoughts when you have education bonds. So who we are, we've now got, I know we're in New South Wales pretty much only in this room, so there's two of me in New South Wales, myself and Maria. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it today, but we've got representation from the business development point of view through all the states. So if you need anything, come and say good day. My contact details are there, you probably can't grab them, but come and see me, I'll give you a card and we can catch up another time. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you've picked up something new, something different from education bonds and different strategies that can be used for. So thank you.
Mark, if I may, just quickly before you jump off stage, the transfer balance cap, that coffee just kicked in. It's an interesting space at the moment, trying to find strategic ways to minimise tax for people who have a cap in place and are obviously starting to pay 15 and 30% tax on superannuation earnings. Yep. It seems to be playing into a space where probably more of an insurance bond, but I guess the education bond as well is as an opportunity to get creative with regards to using that particular product as a means to minimise tax in this space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just remember, at the heart of an education bond is an investment bond. So every time you think investment bond, think maybe an education bond as well. Give me a call. But absolutely, we are seeing a lot of that. And I'll just talk through why some of the advisors I talk to are now considering alternative strategies to superannuation, especially going to Division 296 with the $3 million cap. Is they say, okay, well, this money's going to be taxed internally at 30%. How that looks, you guys are smarter than I do. They may have a large taxable component in their super fund, and they say, well, when we pass away, there's going to be a 17% tax basically if this gets passed to a non-dependent. So what I've got advisors doing at the moment, and we've had a couple set up and a couple that are in the progress, is making withdrawals now whilst the client is still alive, taking some money out of that and putting it into an investment bond. The beauty is tax at a headline rate of 30%, generally a lot lower. So it's still a concessionally taxed environment for them. We can add education beneficiaries, we can add bond estate nominees. When those clients do pass away, that money will get paid tax-free to who they'd like to get paid to, rather than having to worry about the tax that's going to get paid on the taxable component when it comes out of a superannuation fund. So we've got advisors thinking down that path and they're quite well advanced with that thinking, running through a few different scenarios with us about the alternative to superannuation. So, yep.
I'm just interested to know how franking credits are treated in fund.
I think we've run out of time. No, sorry. So franking credits treated inside the fund. Absolutely. So as I said, we get taxed at a headline rate of 30%. Any franking credits that we receive are used to reduce that headline rate of 30%. So if we're looking at Australian share fund, maybe an imputation fund or something that's got a higher level of franking credits, you'll see that effective tax rate, what we refer to as the effective tax rate, being significantly lower than that 30% because any franking credit is used to reduce the overall tax that investment option pays and gets passed on to the client. So we do have a list of all the effective tax rates that our funds are currently paying, and they are lower, especially those ones with high levels of franking credits. That's a really good question. That's how that 30% is reduced.
Great question. Thanks, Mark. You're off the hook. Well done, mate.
Off the
Please
hook? Sweet.
make Mark, show your appreciation for Mark. Thank you.